Hi there, welcome back to the channel, and in this video we are going to learn about web worker in JavaScript. So we are going to understand what is web worker, why do we need it, and how can we use it using JavaScript. So without any delay, let's begin. So here I have three files, the index.html file. So here you can see a paragraph tag with a class of p1 and having 0 value, and we have a button called increment 5 and another class a paragraph tag which is empty, and we have second button which is saying get data. That's all, and we have some basic styling out here just to style the document. And we have another two file, that is the app.js file which is pretty empty file, and another is complex.js file which is also an empty file. So let us go to the browser and we can see this is how it looks. So that's all. Now let's get started with a web worker. So in order to explain what is web worker and how can it helps us to increase the performance of our web application, I need to show you some scenario. So for the basics, let me just explain you like what actually web worker is. So web worker basically helps you to run your JavaScript code in the background so that your UI doesn't get blocked or the UI doesn't get stuck when the user is using it. So it does not become unresponsive to the user. So what do I mean by that? So you might be confusing, what do you mean by blocking the UI? What do you mean by unresponsive? So for that, I need to show you an example. So let's get started with that example quickly. So firstly, I want to grab these two button elements in the JavaScript that we can do using query selector. So let me just say button one, and I'm going to do document dot query selector out here, and I'm just going to select that particular button one. That's all, and I'm going to duplicate it, and I just want to grab the button 2 class or the button 2 elements. That's why I'm writing button 2, and now I'm going to attach an event handling in both the case. So I'm just going to say add event listener, and the event that I'm going to listen is obviously going to be click in case of button, and we know that we pass a callback function here, and that's what I'm doing here. And once the callback function is passed, now what I want to do is I want to grab this p1 paragraph tag, right? So class p1, and I just simply want to say const. Okay, I don't want to do const since I will be changing its value. So let me do it var, and I just want to grab that 0 value. So I'm just going to say document dot query selector. Okay, so down we have here, and I'm going to say p1, and in order to get that value I'm going to write text content. So basically text content is going to give us whatever we have inside this p1 tag, and we have 0, so we are going to get 0 inside this number variable. And now what I want to do is I want to take that number and do some changes. That means I want to add that number, and for that I need to say first parse int, and I'm going to write number. Why am I doing this? Because this number that I'm getting from this paragraph tag, that is in the string format. Now I need to convert this number in the number format, so that's why I'm writing this parse int to convert it into number format from string, and I just want to do plus 5. So what am I doing is basically as soon as user keeps on clicking to increment 5 button, its value is going to be incremented by 5. That's all. That's what I want to do it. And now I just need to update that in the UI as well. So again, I'm just going to say document dot query selector, and okay, so let me do that, and I'm just going to say p1. All right, and again I'm going to write this text content, and inside the p1 I want to enter that number that which we have updated, right? So that's all. This is what button 1 is going to do, and button 2 is also going to have a similar kind of functionality but quite different. So first let me remove this one and make it 2, and now this event listener is going to listen to button 2, and on the click of it we want to grab p2 tag here, and I don't need any text content here because we don't have any value inside the p2 tag. As you can see, it's completely empty. We are going to insert some value using JavaScript only, and again I don't need this guys as well, so I'm going to remove it, and I'm going to write some for loop here. So I'm just going to say for let I equals to 0, and I just going to say I less than 1 0 0 0. Okay, so that's what I'm going to say, and I'm just going to do I plus plus. That's all, and I'm going to run this loop here, and I'm going to do nothing inside the loop. Okay, and I'm just going to have an object called message list. Okay, and this message list object is going to have a message data, and here it is going to say a heavy computed data, okay, as a string, heavy computed data. That's what I'm writing here. And after that, what I'm gonna do is, since I have selected this p2 tag and it's stored in number variable, okay, so let me change its name, and I'm just going to say para. Okay, and okay, not q, it's a typo there. And let me get that para here, and I'm just simply going to say inner HTML. That's all. I'm going to hit it here, and I'm just simply going to say message list here, and then dot message. Notice I'm grabbing this object and I'm trying to insert this string, a heavy computer data, insert this p2 paragraph. That's all I want to do it. And now the code is completed. Now let us go to the browser here and let us refresh it. Now let me click this button, get data. As soon as I click, you can see a heavy computer data is there, and now I click on increment 5, and this number is incrementing the value by 5. Okay, till now this is fine, but let me go back to the VS Code here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add some few zeros here. I'm going to say 1 2 3 4. I'm going to add 4 more zeros here. Let me add 2 more 0 here, and now let me save this file and go back to the browser. Let me refresh it. Now you can see the increment 5 button is working completely fine. Let me refresh it one more time, and let me click this get data button. Now I'm not getting any data. Now let me try to click increment 5, and you can see I've been clicking increment 5 several times, but it's not working. Get data button is not working. It's not showing any data. It's completely blocking the UI. The entire web page is unresponsive to the user. So that's what I mean by saying unresponsive. I can continue to click on increment 5, but it's not working. And now after a while, you can see after some period of time only, I can see this data, a heavy computer data out here, and then direct number 80 value. So this is very much bad UI experience to the user. It is blocking the UI, or we can say it is blocking the execution thread. What do I mean by that? So let me go to the VS Code here. Now you can see as soon as user click to this second button, so this second button is this get data button, and what is going to happen is it is listening to the click event, and as soon as user click to it, now it is stuck in this for loop for a while. So you can consider this for loop as some kind of heavy computational operation. So I'm just going to comment it as heavy computation, and let's just say this is some kind of a complex operation that your code is performing. So here some kind of heavy computation is being required, and your browser is stuck in doing that heavy computation. And when user wants to get that increment 5 data, your browser is busy on this computation or on this operation, and it is not able to listen to this event. So this is what called blocking the UI. So basically your entire web page is becoming unresponsive to the user. So basically now it is providing some kind of bad UI experience for your user. Now how can we improve that? Now before that, we need to understand why this is happening. Because JavaScript is a single threaded language. What does it mean is it is going to run one thread at a time. That means it is going to run one piece of code at a time. That means if the button 1 is running, then it is going to run this code first, it is going to completely execute, and then it is going to move to this code. Before that, if the button 2 is running first, we are clicking button 2 so that it is running first. Now as soon as we come and try to click this button 1, it is not going to run it until and unless this button one operation is completed. So that's what single threaded means it is going to run one piece of code at a time, and until and unless that piece of code is not completed executing it, it won't move to the next piece of code. That's what single threaded means. So that's why we were facing this blocking the UI problem here, since our UI was busy and doing some kind of computational tasks, which is here in the button 2, and that's why when we are clicking the button 1, it was not working because it is single threaded. Until and unless this operation doesn't get completed, it won't move to this piece of code. So for that we need some kind of a multi-threaded platforms, if a single thread is busy here performing this operation and user comes and click to the button 1, then there should be another thread available to execute this line of code. But JavaScript, again I told you, it's just a single threaded language, it is not a multi-threaded language. So how can we do that? How can we get that feature of multi-threading functionality? So we can get that using web worker. So web worker helps us to achieve that. So we can use web worker and pass this heavy computational tasks inside the web worker, and it is going to run all this code into a complete separate thread that is going to be created by browser, not by JavaScript. JavaScript is having just one thread. So whatever the piece of code that we pass inside the web worker, that piece of code is going to be executed by the browser. Browser is going to give you a separate thread. So web worker is basically a browser or HTML API. It is not a JavaScript API. It is an HTML API. We can use web worker in JavaScript and we can optimize it. So let's use web worker and solve this issue here. So let me remove that. So in order to do that, we need to use a worker constructor function. We need to initialize that worker constructor function. So here I'm just going to say worker object, and I'm going to initialize a worker constructor function. So I've just initialized it. Okay. And here inside this worker constructor function, I need to name a JavaScript file where I want to perform that complex operation. So here I'm just going to name it as complex.js. Since we have this complex.js file, so I'm just naming this file. So just we are saying that, hey, JavaScript, we want to perform that complex operation using web worker inside this complex.js file. So that's what this means. Now what we can do is we can go inside this complex.js file and we can perform entire operation. So let me create a function to perform that complex operation. So since I've been saying complex operation multiple times, so let me name this function as complex operation itself. Okay. And then let me create this function, and here we are going to do that. Okay. And let me remove that. Actually inside this web worker, we cannot get that document. We don't have access to that document or the window object, so we cannot do that here. So I need to remove that. I just need to inject the operation or the computational part here, and that's what I'm doing here. Right now let's just say we are done. So this is the part, this is the code that is performing that complex operation, and we are done with the operation. Now how can we pass the entire result, that operation that has been performed from this file, to this file? Because ultimately we are going to inject all this data from this app.js file to this index.html file, right? So we are not going to inject the data from this complex.js file to index.html file. No, we are not going to do that. We need that data from complex.js file to go to this app.js file, and then from this file we are moving it to the index.html file so that the user can see the end result. So we are using this complex.js file just to use web worker and to achieve that multi-threading. Now the operation is done in a completely different thread and the UI is not blocking, and we got data after some time. This data is the message list that we got here. Now how can we pass this data from this file to this file? So for that we have a property or a function, we can say, that is called post message, that is given by web worker itself. So here we can write the name of the data that we want to pass. So we want to pass message list here, so that's why I'm writing message list. That's all. Now this post message is going to pass this data to a JavaScript file where web worker constructor is being initialized. So here we have this app.js file, and in this file we know that our web worker constructor is being initialized. So that's why this post message is going to pass that data to this app.js file only. Okay, so we got that data. Now how can we use that data? So let's see that. But before that, I forgot to do one thing, and that is I need to call this complex operation, otherwise it won't be executing. Okay, now let me go to the app.js and let us paste that query selector which we have cut from the complex.js file. Now we know that we have passed this data using post message to this app.js file. Now how do we receive that data? So that we can do using an on message property of a web worker object. So we have created this worker object using this constructor, worker constructor, right? So now we can use this worker object, and this is going to give us something called on message property. So using that we can access that data that we are getting from the complex.js file. So we can do equals to, and we can simply create a function, and this function, it is going to receive an event. And what is this event? Don't worry, I'm going to show you. So let me log this event. So console.log, and I'm going to log this event. So basically this event is a set of object or a set of information that we are getting from here. So let me reduce this operation some zeros here in order to make it quick. I'm just cutting it. Now let me paste it here, and then now let me go to the browser and let me click to this get data. Now as soon as I click on get data, you can see I'm getting this message event. So this is that particular event that we are receiving using post message. So when we are doing post message list, we are simply saying, hey post message, pass this message list data to a JavaScript file where our web worker constructor is being initialized, and it is going to say, okay, we are going to do that, and it is going to search for that file. We have this app.js file, and here our worker constructor is being initialized, and here using the on message property, we are going to say worker object dot hey on message, give me that particular data which this post message is giving us, and it is going to say, okay, I can give you, but there is a one condition. I cannot give you that particular exact data. I'm going to give you an entire set of object called event. There you are going to get all the list of information, and inside this information you are going to have that particular data as well. So it's your job to find that data. That's what on message property is saying to us. So that's how we are getting this all this random different information. And here we need to search something called data section. Here you can see this data, there is this data object. Here we are getting data property. So inside this data property we have something called message, and we are getting this message. So in order to get that data, we are going to say event.data.message. okay, so we just need to say here event.data.message, and this is how we are going to get our data. Okay, sorry, not here. Again, I need to do it here. So I'm going to say event.data.message. So this is what we need to do. Before that, let me add that additional 0 that I have cut it. And okay, so we are done it. And now let me inject that data inside that HTML. So how can we do that? We simply can do using para dot inner HTML, and we are simply going to say event dot data dot message. That's all. Now using that we are achieving multi-threading. Now no UI is going to get blocked, and now we are not going to get stuck like we are earlier. We were continuously clicking increment 5 button, but it wasn't showing any result. Why? Because the JavaScript thread was busy calculating this complex operation, right? But now what we have done is we have shifted this entire complex operation to a web worker, and this web worker is going to allocate a separate thread in order to perform this complex operation. That's why JavaScript won't be busy using this complex operation, right? So as soon as we user comes and click to this get data button, JavaScript is going to say, okay, this is not my job to execute it. Since the programmer has used worker object, that means the browser is going to handle it, and JavaScript is simply going to assign this piece of code to a browser separate thread, and browser is going to receive that data, and it is going to perform the execution into a complete separate thread, so that when user goes and click to the increment 5 button, it is simply going to increment the value by 5 without blocking the UI, making the UI responsive to the user input. And as soon as the browser separate thread is done with the calculation of this operation, complex operation or heavy computation, we are going to get that data back into the app.js file and browser is going to render it. So that's it. So let us go to the browser and see it. So let me refresh it. Now here I am clicking the get data, and browser is taking and performing the operation there. Meanwhile, if I click on this increment 5 button, as you can see, it is working fine. It is not blocking any UI here. It is working completely fine. And at this point of time, browser is already taking that data, that complex operation, and performing its operation there. And once it is done, as you can see, once the browser is done with the execution, it is returning to us, and we can see we got this a heavy computer data. So that's what web worker basically is. So to sum up, I just can say web worker basically helps you to run your JavaScript code in the background so that you can perform all your complex operation. Or I can do, if I need to be more accurate, I can say all your time consuming operation that we can perform using web worker, and it is going to perform behind the scene in the background using web worker and by a browser. So that's it for today, guys. So I hope you understood what is web worker, and I'm going to see you again in the next video.